We've got two modules finished and ready to go out the door. They've been complete with the track power bus and the Loconet, and we've got them boxed together. Now to box them together, at each end we have a carry plate. That's simply a piece of 3/8 inch plywood, 25 inches by 18 inches wide, and we've made them an extra inch longer than the width of our modules, because we want an extra ½ inch hanging over each end so that when we move our modules in and out of the car, that the module doesn't get scratched. So let's take a look and see how these are fastened.
Remember that when we built the modules, we inserted some T-nuts in each corner. We inserted a T-nut here, T-nut here, a T-nut here, and a T-nut here, the ones that are circled. This is what we're going to use to fasten that piece of plywood to each one of the modules so that we end up with a boxed set. This is the underside of the carry plate, and what we have is we have 3/4 inch washers in each corner. Plus we put an extra 2 washers on each side. This is going to keep the carry plate away from the end of the module, just in case that we run some track right up to the edge of the module, and when we move the package around, that tracks and other pieces of scenery and structures aren't going to get torn out. We've got a handhold here in the middle, and that's going to help us carry this boxed set. Let's turn it over and install it. We've got 4 1¼ inch by 5/16 bolts with a washer in it, 5/16 inch washer, and we're just going to fit this into the corner here, and it should fit in just nicely, and we should be able to put that bolt in pretty much all the way just by hand. We've drilled our holes 3/8 of an inch. That's 1/16 inch larger than the bolt that we're using, and that gives us some flexibility in terms of how things will fit in. So now that we've got our bolts tightened in there by hand, we're just going to take our ratchet with our ½ inch socket, and we're just going to snug those bolts up nice and tight. And voila, we've got a boxed set of modules here that are easy for transporting in and out of the shows that we're doing, and in and out of the back of the car, and up and down the stairs in our basement if that's where we happen to store them. Let's take a look and see how we made those carry plates.
I prepared a cutting diagram for our carry plates. Carry plates are cut out of a piece of 4x8 plywood, poplar plywood that is 3/8 of an inch thick. This is the plywood that's usually used as an underlay on flooring. It sells for about $20 to $22 for a 4x8 sheet of plywood. What I do is I take this cutting diagram to the building supply place where I'm buying the plywood, and I pick up a piece of plywood and I walk it over to their saw service. Many building supply places have a saw service which will cut up plywood for you, usually for free. So I give the carpenter a copy of the cutting diagram and the plywood, and they cut it up very, very nicely for me. I could never ever run a piece of 4x8 plywood through my little baby table saw the way that they can do it through their panel saw, and in that way it saves me a lot of time and trouble. Notice that the length of each one of our carry plates is 25 inches long. That's 1 inch longer than the width of our module. That gives us an extra 1/2 inch overhang on each end so that we don't bump and scrape the sides of the panel. We are also making our carry plates 18 inches wide. Now that can be variable. It can be larger than 18 inches or it can be shorter than 18 inches. It all depends on the amount of scenery and structures that you're putting inside the module. If you're permanently gluing the structures or the scenery to the module, or it can be narrower than the 18 inches if your modules are just the track. And it also depends also on the width of the back seat of your car or the back of your SUV or your minivan. notice that we've got some scrap pieces, take them with you from the saw service because they will come in handy for all the various projects that you want to do. Let's take a closer look at that cutting diagram. So we're here at my favorite building supply store, Rona, at the corner of Hunt Club and Maryville, and we've picked out a nice sheet of 4x8 3/8 inch thick plywood, which we're going to load onto the cart and walk it over to their saw service. So here we are at Rona's saw service, and I'm showing my cutting diagram to the carpenter here, and I'm asking him if he could cut the plywood up into the pieces as shown. I've got some scrap on the top edge. That's what I want, is the scrap. And so he's going to take the plywood and run it through his panel saw. Here we are. We've now got that sheet of plywood all nicely chopped up. 6 pieces for our carry plates plus the scrap that's left over. And we're going to go back home and carry on with fabricating our carry plates. We've given each piece of plywood a good sanding, making sure that we've got things nice and smooth. We had a few knots, holes that fell out, so we filled those up with epoxy and we've sanded them smooth. And so now we're ready to start laying out where we're going to cut out our handholds. I've cut this hole out in the carry plate. This is what I call a handhold. It allows me to put my hand in the hole, and so that when the carry plate is bolted to our 2 modules, our box set of modules, is that we can very easily carry the box set up and down the stairs, in and out of our car, in and out of the train shows, and at the same time the carry plate will protect our track work, our scenery, and our structures. So let's start and do some layout work so that we can cut these holes into our pieces of plywood. So here's the diagram that I use to outline the carry plates when I want to cut them out. First of all, I'm going to locate the center line on each piece of plywood, and then on the 18-inch width I'm going to measure back 1 1/4 inches, and then I'm going to make a mark, which I'm going to take a center punch and I'm going to punch just a slight indentation on the plywood. That helps me locate where I want the hole drilled with my Forstner bit. I'm then going to take a 1 1/2 inch Forstner bit or 1 1/2 inch spade bit, and I'm going to drill 2 holes, 1 on each side, so that I'm going to have the 2 holes. And when I'm finished, I'm going to have a handhold that the width of that handhold is going to be 4 inches. Let's take a closer look at this diagram. So I've got a piece of plywood here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to find the center of this piece of plywood, 25 inches, so that means 12 1/2 this way, and then this is 18 inches, so that's going to be 9 inches that away. From that center line mark, I'm going to measure back 1 1/4 inches on each side of the center line there, so that gives me 7 3/4 this way and 10 1/4 inches that way. And then I'm going to draw a line between those items. That's step 1. Next, I'm going to take my center punch and I'm just going to punch a little dimple on each side. That is going to help me locate the spade bit, the Forstner bit, the circle cutter, or whatever other cutting tool I'm going to use to start to cut out that handhold. So now that we've got one side marked, we're going to mark the other side. And again, it's going to be at 12 1/2 and 9, and we're just going to make a few more marks here just so we can get a nice parallel line. And then we're going to measure out again 1 1/4 inches there and 1 1/4 inches there. Now, why are we marking both sides? Because I want to put on one side, I want to put a strip of duct tape so that when we drill the holes through, that we reduce the amount of tear out that we're going to have in our plywood. We've applied some duct tape to the back side, so now we're ready to start drilling our holes here and here. Our next step is to drill a hole at the extreme points that we just located at the 1 1/4 inches from the center, right here and right here. There's a number of different ways that we could do that. We could use a spade bit, a keyhole saw, or a Forstner bit. We're going to be using the keyhole saw. And there we have the 2 holes drilled out, 2 plugs. And not too much in the way of tear out. Pretty good, pretty good, pretty good. On to the next step. Now that we've got the 2 holes cut out, we're going to draw a line on the top and bottom of those 2 holes. And that is what we're going to be cutting out in the next step. Our next step is to cut out that strip of wood between the 2 holes. We're using our saber saw, and it's going to get a little noisy. One side cut, and let's cut the other side. Well, there we've got a hole for our handholds. Next step is to bevel the edges so that we don't end up with sharp edges when we grab the carry plate. We've got the hole for our handhelds cut out, and what we're going to do now is we're just going to bevel the edge to get rid of the sharpness on the hole, and to make things look a little nicer. There's many different ways that you could do this, ranging all the way from a file or rasp, even a round over bit in a router. That's kind of fancy. What we're going to do is we're going to use a drum sander in our drill. Things are going to get a little noisy here, and we'll see what we can do with this. We've got that one done, so we're just going to take our file here and we're just going to give it a little bit more sand. There, we got that one done. 5 more to go. Well, we've got our carry plates cut up, handhelds cut out and sanded down, and so now we're ready for the next step, and that's to give them 2 coats of paint with a light sanding in between, and then we're going to be ready to install the carry plates onto the modules to make some boxed sets. That's coming up next.